Chosen ones, appointed ones to die. Prepare for what comes tonight. There is no going back. It began with a whisper no one else could hear. Soft, almost like the hiss of wind through broken glass. At first, each thought it was a trick of exhaustion, the phantom voice of their own weary minds. But when dawn broke, the truth revealed itself in ink and ash upon their flesh. On the inside of their wrists, faint but undeniable, a mark had burned itself into existence. An hourglass, its grains of sand drawn not with lines, but with smudges of gray, like smoke pressed into skin. The edges shifted faintly, as though time itself was still moving within the strange sigil. Doctors were baffled. Some dismissed it as a skin condition, others muttered about hallucinations shared across continents. Yet no scalpel, no laser, no ointment could erase it. Priests and holy men, when shown the mark, grew pale and closed their mouths in silence. A few even turned their eyes away, refusing to acknowledge what they had seen, as if speaking of it would invite the same fate upon themselves. But the message was clear. Those who bore the hourglass had been chosen. That night, no matter where they slept, in crowded cities, in quiet villages, in lonely houses on the edge of nowhere, they dreamed the same dream. The voice returned, heavier, ancient, rolling like thunder through their very bones. You were appointed once to die. Tonight, there is no going back. They awoke as one, hearts racing, breath sharp, sheets soaked in cold sweat. The night air around them felt heavier, charged with a dread they could not name. And though oceans and continents separated them, each of the marked felt the same shiver of truth settle deep inside. They were no longer individuals living scattered lives. Destiny had wrapped its iron chains around them, dragging them together towards something inevitable, something they could not yet see. By morning, the mark upon their wrists burned faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat that was not their own. When each stumbled to their doors, windows, or mail slots, they found an envelope waiting, thin, pale, and sealed with black wax that carried no crest. Inside lay only a single sheet of paper, its letters stark as though etched into the page with fire. Coordinates. No names. No explanations. Only numbers that pointed to nowhere they had ever seen. At the bottom, the words glared back at them, impossible to look away from. Refuse, and death finds you alone. Accept, and face your appointed night together. The letters did not fade when they blinked. They seemed to crawl deeper into their eyes, leaving an afterimage imprinted against their vision. No matter how many times they turned away, the words remained. By dusk, each of them had reached the same destination, though none could explain how. Some claimed their feet had carried them without thought. Others admitted their vehicles seemed to steer themselves. A strange compulsion guided them like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. Waiting at the edge of abandoned airstrips in every corner of the world was the same impossible sight, a plane. Its frame was sleek and silent, its windows dark as obsidian. The engines hummed without sound, vibrating with a rhythm too perfect to be human-made. No pilot stood at the stairway. No crew ushered them inside. Yet when they stepped closer, they saw the truth that made their breath falter. Inside, rows of leather seats waited, and on the headrest of each, a name had been carved deep into the hide. Their names. Not a single one resisted for long. Against their will, their hands moved, gripping cold railings. Their bodies obeyed, even as their minds screamed. And one by one, they boarded, forced to take their seats in silence. The doors sealed with a hiss like a sigh. Without a single human at the controls, the jet shuddered and lifted, gliding into the sky as if carried by unseen hands. Clouds swallowed them whole. Lightning tore across the heavens. The plane cut through a storm so violent it should have torn its wings apart, but it did not falter. They pressed their faces to the windows, searching for landmarks, searching for safety. But what they saw below chilled them to their bones. The world had vanished. There was no ocean, no land, only a vast abyss of black mist. Then, ahead it emerged, rising from the storm like a wound in reality itself. An island. No map had ever shown it. No human eye had charted its shore. And as the jet descended, every heart beat the same frantic rhythm, for they all understood a single truth. They were not passengers. They were prisoners of fate. The descent was soundless. The jet's wheels kissed the ground with unnatural grace, gliding across a strip of stone that looked more like a scar than a runway. No towers, no lights, no signs of civilization. Only the crushing stillness of a place untouched by time. When the doors opened, saltless air rushed in. It was not the air of the sea, for there were no waves, no gulls crying overhead, no scent of brine. The island was silent, dead silent. The shore that greeted them was littered not with driftwood or shells, but with statues. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, stood frozen in jagged rows, their bodies carved from rough stone, their faces twisted in fear, pain, or sorrow. Some reached upward as if clawing toward the sky. Others knelt in surrender. The chosen did not need to ask who they were. In their bones, they knew. These were the ones who had come before, those who had borne the mark and failed. The path stretched inward, paved in black rock that glimmered faintly under the stormlight. It wound through skeletal trees that bore no leaves, only twisted limbs like broken arms. And at the center, rising against the horizon, loomed a fortress. Its towers clawed upward like spears. Its walls bled streaks of moss and age. The gates, however, were wide open. They did not creak or resist. They gaped like a mouth that had been waiting centuries to swallow them whole. Inside, they found a hall vast enough to swallow cathedrals. Shadows clung to its vaulted ceilings, where chandeliers of rusted iron hung heavy, their candles burning with flames that gave no heat. At the center stretched a table so long it seemed endless. Plates of polished stone shimmered in the dim light, and on each plate, etched in script that gleamed like fresh blood, was a name. Their name. No one moved. Fear bound them to the spot. Then the air shivered, and the voice returned. Not booming now, but intimate, curling like smoke around their ears. "Sit," it whispered. "Feast before your trial begins." The plates trembled. Food appeared, but not food as they knew it. Meats that glistened too darkly, fruits that bled when touched, bread that pulsed faintly like it had a heartbeat. The smell was sweet and rancid all at once, luring and repelling. And though none wished to obey, each felt the same compulsion thrumming through their marked wrists. The hourglass burned against their skin, urging them toward their seats. The trial had not yet begun, but already the island was testing them. The table glimmered with abundance, as though crafted for kings and conquerors. Platters overflowed with roasted meats, their skin glistening with fat that caught the light like jewels. Towers of fruit leaned precariously, their skins perfect, unblemished. Apples red as fresh blood, grapes swollen as though carved from crystal. Silver goblets brimmed with ruby wine, catching the flicker of candlelight like molten fire. It looked perfect, too perfect. For a long time, no one moved. Hunger tugged at their bellies, but dread clung heavier. The silence deepened until one man, his hands shaking, eyes wild with disbelief, lifted his fork. The mark on his wrist burned as though urging him forward. He cut a piece of meat, raised it to his lips, and forced himself to chew. The illusion shattered instantly. The flavor was not savory, not rich. It was ash and rot, bitter and choking, filling his mouth with the stench of graves long forgotten. He gagged, spitting the bite back onto the plate. But the meat had transformed. What had been roasted flesh was now gray sinew and bone, crawling with worms that squirmed under the candlelight. Gasps echoed through the hall. One of the women dropped her goblet in panic. It struck the stone floor and rolled, spilling thick liquid across the ground. But it was not wine. It was darker, heavier. Blood. The scent of iron filled the air. Then came the sound, a single plate toppling. It struck the floor with a hollow crack, scattering what should have been bread. Instead, white fragments clattered across the stones. Not bread, bones. Human bones, picked clean, brittle as dust. The candles flickered violently, though no wind touched them. The food shifted again, fruit splitting open to reveal pulsing veins, goblets filling themselves to the brim with something thicker than wine, meats melting into piles of gristle and marrow. The chosen looked at one another, horror dawning in their eyes. This was not a feast. It had never been a feast. It was a ritual, and by eating, by swallowing even a morsel, they had already agreed. Their hands shook, their stomachs twisted, but the mark burned hotter now, branding them with unseen fire. They understood the truth with a weight that crushed them to silence. This was a covenant. They were bound. The trial had already begun. The air shifted. The long table trembled, plates rattling as though something immense had taken a breath beneath the stone. Then, with a sudden roar, torches along the walls ignited. Their flames leapt unnaturally high, casting the hall in a writhing red glow. The heat swelled, suffocating. The fortress itself seemed to melt, its stone walls running like wax under the grip of fire. The ceiling twisted and dissolved into a canopy of flame that roared yet did not consume. Shadows of screaming faces flickered inside the firelight, mouths open in eternal agony. Then the voice came, not a whisper this time, not a curl of smoke, but a thunder that shook the marrow of their bones. Each of you is marked for the sins you buried. Tonight, you burn unless the truth is spoken. The words rattled the torches, and the fire surged forward, forming a circle around the chosen. The mark on their wrists seared as though pressed by a brand. None could move. None could flee. One by one, the fire lashed outward, striking the first of them, a man in a torn business suit. His skin blistered as the flames kissed his arm, though the fire left no permanent wound, only pain. He collapsed to his knees, screaming. The voice demanded, "Confess." And he did. Through choked sobs, he spoke of a betrayal hidden for years. His brother's company, stolen by forged signatures and quiet threats. As the words spilled out, the fire eased, the mark upon his wrist dimming faintly. The next chosen, a woman trembling so violently her goblet spilled, was seized by the fire's heat. She tried to resist, tried to deny, but the flames licked her skin, peeling screams from her throat. When at last she broke, her confession came, an infant abandoned, a past buried beneath decades of silence. The hall filled with their voices. Crime spilled forth like a flood. Theft, adultery, betrayals, secret cruelties hidden behind masks of ordinary lives. And with each truth, the fire hissed and pulled back, sparing them. But not all spoke the truth. One man, sweating and pale, stammered a lie, insisting he was innocent. The mark on his wrist flared like molten iron. His scream tore through the hall as the fire coiled around him, consuming his flesh with searing agony until the truth broke from his throat in a raw howl. The others watched in horror, realizing the law of this place. A lie was punished by fire. The mark itself knew the truth, branding falsehoods with unbearable pain. They could not hide. They could not pretend. Their sins were no longer secrets. They were currency demanded by the trial. And with each confession, the voice grew quieter, as if satisfied. Yet in the shadows of the firelight, the statues that lined the hall seemed to lean closer, their stone mouths twisted in silent judgment. The trial of fire had begun. When the last confession fell into silence, the flames dimmed, retreating into the torches as if satisfied. The air grew heavy with smoke, the hall still glowing red with the memory of fire. The chosen sat slumped in their seats, broken by shame, trembling from pain. But then something shifted. The voice did not speak again. Instead, the silence stretched, pressing against their skulls until it became unbearable. A cold wind slipped through the fortress, though no doors had opened. The candles guttered, their flames bending not upward but sideways, pulled toward a single place at the table. And in that moment, revelation struck like ice. Not all who sat among them had been chosen. One of them was something else. At first it was subtle, a movement in the corner of their eyes that didn't match the rhythm of a human body. A smile too slow, stretching wider than it should. The flicker of pupils that seemed too deep, too black, as though no light could escape them. The mark on its wrist was there, yet wrong. Where theirs glowed faintly with heat, this one seemed carved, etched too clean, too sharp, as if painted to deceive. They stared, realizing too late. The shadow was among them, wearing skin like a mask, speaking in borrowed tones. It had been at the table from the beginning, mimicking hunger, mimicking fear. But it had not been chosen for trial. It had been sent for something else. To hunt. A scream tore the silence. One of the chosen lurched forward, clutching his throat as blood seeped between his fingers. His eyes bulged, face twisting with agony. The others scrambled back from the table, chairs crashing to the stone. And then they saw it. The shadow leaned closer to its victim, smile stretching impossibly wide, teeth glinting too sharp in the firelight. Its movements were jerks and spasms, as though the body it wore was not built for it. The victim's body went still. His eyes glassed over. One of their own was already dead. The survivors froze, horror rooting them in place. None could tell which of the faces around the table still belonged to the chosen, and which was the shadow's mask. The trial of truth had ended. The trial of survival had begun. The fortress groaned as though it were alive. Walls shifted, corridors stretched, and then the heart of the place revealed itself. A tower of impossible height, rising into the storm like a black spear. Its windows glowed faintly red, as if fire burned within. At its center hung a pendulum, vast and heavy, swaying in slow arcs. But this was no ordinary pendulum. It did not move with time, it moved with them. Each swing matched the pounding of their hearts, rising and falling in perfect unison. And then came the bell. It tolled with a violence that rattled bone, shaking dust from the rafters. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt deep in their chests, pressing against their lungs until breath came ragged. And with each strike, one of them screamed, collapsed, and went still. Another life stolen, another soul claimed. Panic seized them. Some tried to run, but the tower's spiral staircase pulled them in, its steps climbing higher, higher, though each step grew heavier. Their legs dragged as though eternity itself clung to their ankles, trying to drag them back into the abyss. The bell tolled again. Another fell, body crumpling on the stairs. Their skin was already gray before it struck the stone. Upward they climbed, lungs burning, hearts racing in sync with the pendulum. None dared to speak aloud the truth that was growing clearer with every death, that the tower wasn't measuring time at all. It was measuring them. When at last they reached the top, the storm parted just enough to reveal a chamber lined with glass that looked out across the void. The pendulum swung behind them, massive and endless, glowing faintly with veins of crimson light. And in the chamber's center stood a circle of symbols carved into the floor, the hourglass shape etched again and again in a spiral. There the voice spoke, not in rage, not in command, but in something colder. Something final. You were never fighting to live. You were fighting to choose who would die last. The realization struck them heavier than the toll of the bell. Their struggle, their confessions, their terror, it had all been building not to salvation, but to a cruel narrowing. One by one, the tower would take them, until only a single heartbeat remained. And the pendulum swung on, patient, inevitable. When fear grips men, loyalty dies. The climb had broken them. Every toll of the bell had stolen another life, and now only a handful remained. Their breaths came ragged, their eyes wide with terror, and every step up the spiral staircase felt like it was carved from their souls. It happened suddenly. One chosen, his face pale, lips trembling, snapped. With a desperate shove, he hurled the woman climbing before him into the abyss below. Her scream cut through the tower like a blade, echoing until it was swallowed by silence. The pendulum froze mid-swing. The bell did not toll. For the first time, time itself seemed to hesitate. Then, with a groan that shook the tower, the gears ground forward again, only slower, hungrier. The voice, faint but unmistakable, curled through the chamber like smoke. So it begins. The others turned, their eyes no longer filled with fear alone, but suspicion. Every face was an enemy now, every hand a threat. Madness bloomed. Another lunged, tackling his fellow against the wall. Nails raked across stone, flesh tore, and blood spattered down the steps. The mark on their wrists burned brighter with each act of violence, pulsing like a brand feeding on their hatred. The truth revealed itself in horror. The mark had not simply chosen them. It had corrupted them. Whatever will they'd once had was being twisted, sharpened into blades of paranoia and greed. They fought not for freedom, not even for survival, but for the right to be the last heartbeat standing. The pendulum swung again. This time it was slower, heavier, dragging a smear of blood along its brass edge as if it had fed from their chaos. The gears shrieked and shuddered under the weight of fresh violence, grinding louder with every spatter that struck them. The clock tower, once a monument of stone and iron, now reeked of blood. Its gears turned not with time, but with the lives they tore from one another. And above the din, the whisper came once more, soft, patient, satisfied. Choose. The tower reeked of smoke, blood, and despair. The stairs were slick with it, littered with bodies twisted in terror, their faces frozen mid-scream. The gears groaned beneath the weight of death, every tooth dripping crimson. Only two remained. They staggered into the chamber at the top of the tower, lungs heaving, eyes hollowed by all they had seen. The mark on their wrists blazed so brightly now it seemed carved into bone, burning with the fire of inevitability. Then the bell began to toll. It was no longer the measured rhythm of a clock. It was a heartbeat, vast and merciless, reverberating through their chests until their ribs ached. With every strike, the glass windows trembled, and the pendulum cut the air with a hiss sharp enough to split the soul. The fortress itself seemed to lean closer, its walls whispering in voices not made for human ears. The words slid into their minds, filling them with a truth they could not deny. Only one leaves the island. Death was always your companion, but survival demands blood. They turned to face one another trembling. They had not been enemies before. Hours ago, they were strangers bound by terror, clinging to one another in fleeting moments of humanity. But now, the island had stripped that away. It had carved out the possibility of mercy, leaving only the demand for blood. Their eyes met, pleading, searching for a way out. There was none. The fortress had written the ending long before their feet had touched its cursed shore. The pendulum swung low, a blade of brass and shadow, slicing through the air, cutting closer to the circle carved into the floor. Its hum filled the chamber like a dirge. Both knew what it meant. One heartbeat too slow, one moment's hesitation, and the tower itself would decide who fell. And so, as the last bell tolled, they raised trembling hands, not in prayer, not in defiance, but in desperate recognition that their survival would be measured not by fate, but by the blood they spilled. The pendulum swung. By dawn, the island was silent again. The survivor stumbled to the shore, body trembling, the mark now carved deep into bone. Behind them, the fortress crumbled into dust, statues screaming as they shattered. The ocean opened, and a boat appeared, empty, waiting. The voice whispered one last time, "You were appointed once to die. Tonight, you lived. But tomorrow, the mark will call again. There's no going back."